Hello, how are you? I am your professor for this instructor, Reverend Carissa Rogers, and I wanted to actually make sure that I did your lectures and try to record them and present them in a way that you are getting all the information, and I know that you're getting all the information, as opposed to being able to try to be able to make it work as we have in VCamp in the past. So eGenzabar is a new platform. I thank you all for your patience because we're all learning together, and so I want you all to be aware of that because we're being patient with each other as we figure out how to get it together. A few things that I want to let you all know for the semester. If you have not received your emails already and received your syllabus and your course agenda that has your assignments and your assignment schedules with your due dates on it, please let me know. But they are also uploaded in your coursework on eGenzabar. So you can go in there. You need to be very acquainted with those and read them very thoroughly because the due dates that are on them are the hard due dates. So I want to clarify because I've had several questions on this via email. And people are like, well, which date is the right date? I see more than one due date when I go into eGenzabar on these assignments. You have a hard and a soft due date, okay? Your hard due date is the one that is listed in your course agenda. So for your welcome week assignment, I extended an extra week because it took a little bit longer to be able to get it online. It's due on the 26th, but so is this week's journal, okay? So both of them are due at the same time, but they're from 2 separate weeks. So you had an extra week to get one done, and then you had the normal allotted time to get your welcome, your week 1 for chapter 1 done. So it says 8/26 for both of them, and then it says 9/9 is also a deadline. Okay, so for welcome week, your assignment is due on 8/26. But if you also see 9/9, it means that if you do not turn it in by that date, you are no longer allowed to turn it in. So for most of your assignments, I have given you the grace to be able to go back and work on those for the duration of the semester. So for those, you'll see 12/2. If you see another date other than 12/2, then that means you do not have the full semester to be able to make that work up in this late. So make it your priority to know when your assignments are due and to be able to get those done in a timely fashion. For your book this semester, the bookstore uses a very small book by the Rachels, Stewart, and I can't think of his name. And that is the book that the department has chosen. And I like that book, but I'm not sold on it as the best teaching book. And I don't get to make the decision about that as what it is for the department. But I did use that book last semester, and we had a lot of trouble getting through it with the class that I was in. So I elected for this semester to choose a different book. So because I did that, the bookstore does not have it, and they're not going to be able to order it. So this is what the book looks like. It's a thick red textbook. I'm about to say it's a good 600 pages. But this is the book that I'm actually asking you to have for this class. If you are not able to order this book online through Amazon or Half Price Books or textbooks.com because it's less than $10. This copy here was $10, okay? Because I actually went in the store and I physically bought it. But the ones online, they start as cheap as $1 plus $3 shipping, so a $4 book, as opposed to if you go to the bookstore and you buy the book that we have there, it's a lot more pricey. So with that being said, but I know some of you have book vouchers, some of you have book scholarships, and they can only be redeemed in the bookstore, so I totally understand. If you will notice in your assignments, you have the reading listed for both of them. So it's not listed in your syllabus, but it is listed in eGenzabar that when you're reading a specific unit or a specific chapter, that it has both readings set. And for the ones there where there is no exact parallel, I will mention that, and your lecture will bridge the gap. So make sure that you're watching and you're keeping up with what we're covering in the lecture, because it will cover what you need to know for your midterms and your finals. Additionally, I've gotten to meet many of you by email, and I am grateful for that. I have started reading many of your Welcome Week assignments and getting acquainted with you through that as well. I am excited about that and learning about most of you. I think we got mostly sophomores and juniors this year, so that's interesting, and that's a good thing too. So I'm excited about this semester. If at any point you have any questions, there's anything that you don't understand, that we need to actually get together and have a meeting, or you need to ask questions of me, I am always available. I tell people to use the syllabus to make sure you have my phone number and my email, because if you will read it, you'll know that the email that I choose is not my philander email, but it also has my direct cell phone on it as well, so you can use it and call me. And if you need extended time, then we can always set up an appointment and be able to block that off so that you can get what you need. My goal as your instructor is to be able to not only teach you the material, but to be able to offer you the type of skills, guidance, and assistance that you need beyond Philander Smith College. Okay? College is a place where we learn and we find ourselves and we grow into who we are that we never knew. We find ourselves. And so the content in this class will help lead us to that end. Some of it is challenging. Some of it you will not agree with. Some of it you will have questions about, because wrapped up in ethics is also critical thinking. And unfortunately, a lot of us never get the opportunity to learn critical thinking before we get to a collegiate level. And when I say that, I'm speaking specifically about putting together sound arguments, knowing the intentionality of our words and our rhetoric, being able to use a reason or thought process to be able to arrive at a decision, and knowing the differences in those processes and what they create. All of that's wrapped up in ethics. And so we're going to begin today with chapter 1, which talks about what is ethics. No matter which book you have, chapter 1 is your reading for this week. For your journals, your journal is always based on your reading. And so sometimes you will have specifically directed questions, and sometimes you will have that general question that you have this week, which is to tell me what you learned, what stuck out to you, what concepts did you not know, what did you feel is valuable to your life, what is it that you disagree with, how do you engage this with knowledge that you already have, or the things that you already know. For me, that helps me understand that you've not only read the material, but you've comprehended what you read, and you can engage that information with what you already know. Those three things are very important. And so, again, your journal is always based on your reading. We have not started Make the Case yet. We will begin that with week 2. So some of you have emailed me and have jumped the gun because y'all was ready to make the case this week. I'm excited to know that, but we won't be doing that on this assignment, because this book is the book that I've chosen goes into details with the different philosophers and their specific contributions. For those of you who do not have that book, there will be an alternate assignment available. So I am presently generating that, and I will have that online for you next week. Well, probably later this week, because that assignment will be due for next week's unit. So because this is online, I'm gonna tell you that we're spending about a week a unit, because we got to throw in midterms, finals, Thanksgiving week, a few weeks that we'll be gone, but we're spending about a week per unit. So if you give yourself the necessary time to work through what is on the syllabus, it will take you that amount of time. The work is not hard, I will tell you that. However, it will take your time and your commitment. So the work is not hard, but it can be time consuming. So govern yourself and manage your time in such a way that you can get it all done. So let's go ahead and get into it. What is ethics? Now, unfortunate part is that this is not like a Facebook Live, and we can't get like questions back and feedback. We're looking through that to see if we can work through that this semester. But ethics is also known as moral philosophy. So you will hear the terms used interchangeably. Ethics, morality, moral philosophy. Anytime you hear either 3 of those terms, it's usually talking about the exact same thing. And it's basically trying to understand moral concepts to justify moral principles and theories. Anytime you hear ethics, we're talking about what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, what we should do, what we shouldn't do, what's permissible, but it's not always the best. And not only are we talking about these things, but we're talking about how they're in relationship with each other. Because sometimes it doesn't always line itself up, especially when you're looking at ethics in light of our society, how we live, how we apply them to our personal lives, how we live them out in our community, how we see them in law, and whether the law is considered right or wrong, in terms of whether we see them in church or other institutions. Etiquette is also related to ethics and how one should or shouldn't behave, or should or shouldn't present themselves. And so we're going to go into all of that. So when we think about ethics, theory is one thing. And theory is usually what we call descriptive ethics. It's the study and the science of what ethics is considered to be. It asks the question, hold on, I got notes in front of me, y'all. It asks the questions, what do people think is right? And then you have normative ethics, which is more concerned with the rules of the theories, and it asks the questions, how should people act? So one is, what do people think is right? And that's looking at history, that's looking at principles, that's looking at science, it's looking at the study of things in order to be able to figure out as a whole, what do we think is right as people? And then you've got normative ethics, normal being a part of what we consider normal, regular, everyday. What is normative? How is this applied? How do people actually act out these things that are considered the basis of what's believed to be right? And that looks different. And so chapter 1 engages us in looking at ethics in the light of a few major institutions, okay? And they vary, because there's not one way to look at ethics or morality. It's a spectrum. And so on this spectrum, you got people who fall on different sides, and you've got all different types of people, namely all different kinds of philosophers. We'll cover a scope of all different types of ethics, but even if you just look through each Bar in terms of what's in your unit, we're going to talk about self-interest, egoism, value ethics, utilitarianism, Immanuel Kant and deontological system. And so that's looking at natural law, metaphysics. We're looking at contract ethics, and we're going to get into just a little bit of that today, because there's an example in chapter 1 that goes into it with Socrates' credo. But virtue-based ethics, religion and ethics, value-based ethics, challenges to ethics. I mean, there's so many different sides and spectrums and scopes and ways to be able to look at it. And so when we look at the scope of morality, we're looking at, who does it include? Does it include all human beings? Does it include rational human beings? Does it include sentient human beings, or people who are only acknowledged that they have the bodily form? Like, as long as you got that, you're included. You got some people that's like, nah, you can't just be rational. You got to be good. You got to be a certain type of person in order for this to apply to you. So in the scope, it's important to always be aware, who is this level of morality directed to? Because certain people have morality prescribed at different standards. And then you've also got a hierarchy of values in terms of what's the most important thing in ethics. Okay? So, and that is thinking about what's important in life in terms of how I exercise my ethics. Is it my survival? Is it justice? Is it happiness? Is it freedom? Is it love? Is it my ability to say that naturally I am superior? In terms of figuring that out on a spectrum, like, what is the hierarchy of what is the most valuable thing ethically, and how should we conduct ourselves? So, two things that we're looking at. The scope of morality, who's included, who is the theory speaking to, and the hierarchy of values. What is most important in this theory in terms of how we live out the ethic and what the ethic is applied to. But the goal of all of it, all levels of morality, when we're talking about good, bad, right, wrong, permissible behavior, not permissible, is to present a common solution of alleviating suffering. The whole purpose of us having ethics in our life to be contributing to the order by which we live is so that life is made better because of it. And so there's this grand scheme of balance and understanding that there is good and there is bad, and that there are things that we should do and there are things that we shouldn't do, and there are some things that we do that affect other people, and then there are some things that we do that just affect ourselves. Ethics is concerned with all of those things. How is the whole affected by the actions of each one? Because each one of us contribute to a grand scheme of a larger system, and that's usually where we see ethics most applied. So religion is one of the first places that comes to our mind when we're thinking about what's ethical. A lot of times when we get our first conceptions of right or wrong in our practical everyday life, it is because we have learned them from a religious institutional setting. Because religion is a part of our culture. It's how we speak to our spirit. Okay, and so our spirit is innately, I don't want to say predisposed in any direction, because I don't believe that, but I do believe that it is concerned to an extent, and all of us as individuals are concerned to different levels, but it's based a lot of times on what it was we were taught. So for those of us who grew up in Christocentric homes, or homes that abide by Christianity, a lot of times that was our first introduction to right or wrong. Outside of those things that keep us safe, okay? Like don't touch a hot stove, or don't play with the electrical sockets, okay? Those are things that they're based on descriptive ethics. Science tells us that if we put our hand to a hot stove, it's gonna burn us. We don't have to wonder about that. We don't have to guess. We don't have to pontificate. People don't have to agree on that. That's something you can go test and you can see. Put your hand on a hot stove and it'll burn, okay? And so in terms of right or wrong in those senses, in terms of that type of practical everyday behavior, it's based on something completely different than you shouldn't lie. That's one that we hear often, that it's not ethical to be a liar. But in what case? Does that apply to all cases? Is it always unethical to lie? Or is it ethical to lie in certain cases based on what your hierarchy of values is? Meaning that if survivalism is the first thing on my hierarchy of values, and I have stolen food to be able to feed myself, because the value of survivalism says that this is a virtue that is actually, not even a virtue, but a value that is needed to be met. And I get caught doing so, knowing that if I tell the truth, I will then be implicated in a crime, and then I will be void of the value that I even began this in the first place for. Or is it ethical to lie because I'm achieving the value? Those are questions that we have to be able to have conversations about and actually ask, because people feel different ways about it. So the difference between how we come up with the ethics also makes a difference. You see, religion is based on revelation or divine authority, whereas ethics in general is based on reason and human experience, which again is why that hot stove, you can have the experience of touching that thing and know, bro, you probably shouldn't touch that, you should leave that alone. Whereas in religion we have the 10 Commandments, if you will, that were given from the divine revelation that was passed to a human who wrote them and then gave them to the people. So if an individual, Moses, didn't have this revelation from God, then he wouldn't have known to write them down in the first place to be able to give them to the people. So there is a different level of authority of where the ethic comes from. And who can say, bro, God didn't tell you that those were the 10 Commandments. We're not listening to those. Because at that point, that's subjective. And then a person can argue that. You can't say that I haven't talked to God. I don't know if you talked to God. I know that you said you have. And so there can be this back and forth based on those things. It's harder to test. It's harder to prove. But the weight of it remains the same. And so we got all different types of religious institutions, not just a Christian institution. You've got Buddhist, Hindu, Judaic, alternate. And I say alternate because you still have people who practice indigenous religions that have been passed down by oral traditions, or people who come from different places, who practice different religions from their ethnic and cultural backgrounds. And so all of those different systems we just have to be aware of are rooted in revelation or divine authority, whereas ethics is rooted in human experience and reason. Another place that we'll find it is in the law. Ethics is big in the law because the law legislates what is right and what is wrong, or what is permissible and what is not permissible. Because what is and is not permissible is not always synonymous with what is right and wrong. And that's important for us to be able to nuance. And the example that we'll look at from Socrates' Credo, that was one of the things that came up. And so as we break that down, it will help us understand that just a little bit better. But it's important to note that we can't make those practices equal. That just because something is a law does not necessarily mean that it is right. And so just being aware, they're not necessarily even. Sometimes they're like this, so just being aware. But ethics may judge some laws to be immoral, without denying that they're valid as laws. And we got all different kind of examples of that. Slavery was legal for a very long time, and there was nothing right about it. Okay? In terms of how we have seen humans treated, in terms of the capital gain that was waged on that treatment, in terms of the system that was built because of that treatment, and the profit that was associated with it, the commodification of human beings. That was completely legal. Nothing right about it. Ethically, morally, however you want to go into that, and we can go into the details of it. But I think we all know what took place and why it was considered not okay, even though it was permissible at the time. We see it happening even present day with the legalization of marijuana, okay? So for a long time, it was illegal to be caught with the substance. And to be caught with it was punishable by fines and or imprisonment. And so you have a lot of people who have been imprisoned because they broke what was at one time a law that is now being made legal in many places. And so now that it is legal, there is an ethical question of whether or not those people should still be confined behind bars, because the legality has changed. So the punishment should as well. And you have people who go back and forth on that, who feel like, well, they broke the law at that time, and so they should be punished. Another question is the punishment commensurate with the crime? Another ethical conversation, because again, just because it's a law does not necessarily mean that it is moral. And so what are the limitations to that morality? And what are the limitations to the application, knowing that it is not permissible? And then you got some aspects of law that are not, some aspects of morality that are just not covered in the law at all. Like it's just not touched. And that's kind of where we are now with the question of whether or not the sanctions of the people who have committed the crime of having marijuana when it was a crime should be released now that it's legal. Because we haven't had a law to say that all of the people who were convicted should be released. There's nothing that says that, which means it's on the table and it's up for grabs. Whereas for slavery, you knew exactly what was happening for those who had the slaves and those who attempted to escape to slavery. So we knew who the law benefited. And so even in this case now, where we're looking at the legalization of marijuana, we see that the law now is benefiting the profit holders, the stakeholders, those who are in corporate positions and able to make a profit. But it doesn't say what happens for those who once committed the crime. Should they be free? Should they not? And I think people are making a greater case now for how we should be dealing with that based on the morality and not necessarily the history. So the only sanctions for morality is basically your conscience whipping you real bad and your reputation possibly being tarnished. With the law, they can impose different type of sanctions on you. So when we're talking about the penalty for marijuana being fines and imprisonment, the penalty for escaping slavery was death most times. Unless you had a master who decided that they wanted to keep you to torture you. And then they might do that. and get a little bit more work out of you in the process. But your quality of life was going to be so severely diminished that death might have been a more favorable option if you did not receive it. And so these are the types of things to be aware of. In religion, the penalty is usually about the fate of your soul. And so these are different things for us to take note of in terms of what makes the difference between ethics and the institutions. Etiquette is another area that we don't talk about a lot, but that also is comparable to ethics, but it's not the exact same thing. We talk about etiquette, we're talking about social customs and the ways that we should conduct ourselves based upon the social class that we are a part of, or desire to be. There is a play called Pygmalion turned into a movie called My Fair Lady that came out. The play came out in the 30s. I think the movie ended up coming out a little bit later than that. It was like a black and white kind of movie. But it goes into this tale about this woman who wanted to transcend her social class and the etiquette that she needed to learn in order to be acceptable in high society. And so etiquette is merely about social customs, and it includes everything from form to style to presentation to the way we express ourselves, the language that we use. It includes all of those things. But it's concerned with what's polite, while ethics is concerned with what is right. Okay? Etiquette is what's polite. Ethics is what is right. And again, it's all about societal standards, and that's for how you dress yourself, how you greet people, the manner of conversation that you hold, all the way down to the way you hold your teacup, okay? We crack jokes about people who lift their pinky when they got their little teacup and they're drinking, but for various periods of time, that was a social custom, and it was an indication of where you fell in your social class. And so the different things that you know are still indicators of that in our society. Other social customs, holidays, festivals, social transactions, how we engage with doing business with one another, how we know how to conduct ourselves. All of that's an indication of, a lot of times, where we fall in the class structure. Even down to how we dispose of the dead. Okay, we're learning to be creative, however. There are people who've done it different ways, traditionally and culturally, based on those teachings. And so how we're taught helps to inform what both our ethics and our etiquette is. And so being mindful of what the differences are. As you're taking notes, I want you to be sure that you write these things down in terms of what ethics is in comparison to religion, law, and etiquette. Religion is based on divine revelation. Ethics is based on reason and human experience. The consequences to not following the rules in religion are related to the fate of your soul. For ethics, it is related to your reputation and your conscience. For law is based on the governing structure and what it needs in order to maintain order. Ethics is based on human experience and reason. The sanctions for law include fines, imprisonment, and sometimes even death. The sanctions for ethics, again, is your reputation and your conscience. Etiquette is about being polite, where ethics is about what's right. The sanctions for poor etiquette sometimes is the acknowledgement or the lack of acknowledgement of belonging. So in some ways, I guess that could be reputation, social status, placement in the societal hierarchy. Whereas again, with ethics, it's merely human experience. It's reputation. And conscience. But the other thing is that all institutions have limitations. So what are the limitations of the institutions that